Hey everyone, Chris Carter here from the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We've got Ray Fittipaldo on, and we're going to be talking about Shador Sanders and his visit with the Steelers and their pre-draft top 30 visits. What does it mean for their quarterback plan? Are they actually looking at him in the first round? We'll talk about that. The pending Aaron Rodgers decision, could it be made tonight at the Pat McAfee show? And as well as looking at offensive and defensive visits to page out and look out. What have the Steelers been doing, and where could their emphasis be in this draft? All here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers writers, and as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only will they help you when you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, they'll also make sure that you have your workers' compensation rights protected. Be sure to call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about the big news that came out yesterday, and that was that the Steelers are hosting Shador Sanders, Colorado quarterback, for a top 30 pre-draft visit, part of their looking around the college football world and the draft world to see which athletes they want to get a closer look at. That's visit scheduled for tomorrow, Thursday. And Ray, this further opens up the door for the people who think that the Steelers really are going to take a quarterback in the first round. Some people have projected Shador Sanders to fall to them. Some people think that's more Jaxson Dart speed, or some people even say Jalen Milroe will be a pick there. I've been one this whole process to say I do not see them taking a first-round quarterback. But with bringing in Shador Sanders, do you think that truly opens the door, or is this just the Steelers just checking the boxes, making sure, hey, we got to take a look at the top quarterbacks in this class just to make sure we aren't missing on a guy that could be a difference maker?
Yeah, Chris, I think the Steelers wouldn't waste their time bringing in Dart and Sanders if it wasn't a possibility. I don't know how likely it is, but I do think you have to keep the door open for a quarterback falling to them, and I think they want to be, careful to have all their ducks in a row there. They want to make sure they got to know all these quarterbacks really well throughout the pre-draft process. And if you notice, Chris, with these top 30 visits, there's been a theme. The Steelers have been present at pro days like Ohio State and Will Howard, Texas and Quinn Ewers, Alabama and Jalen Milroe. Those guys to date have not been in for visits. Where the top brass, Omar and Mike, haven't been, Louisville, Colorado, and Mississippi, those guys have been brought in to meet with the head coach and the offensive coordinator to do the whiteboard work and, some of the other stuff that you might be able to get done at a pro day dinner or, in a pro day setting. So, it's not everything that Shador Sanders is coming here, but I do think they are checking their box. And in the event that he does fall to 21, they're going to want to know what they're getting and if he truly would be a possibility there.
And look, this is part of the draft process. You prepare for so many different possibilities of happening. Like Brian Batko, our colleague, released like a best case scenario sort of mock draft where, like, hey, if the things that the Steelers need just happen to fall to them, this is how it would happen, and this is the chances of it looking even close to something like this. So like if like all the top defensive tackles fell to them, what would that look like? But you also have to prepare for, and Brian will do this in his series that he does every year, prepare for the worst situation. And what if Kenneth Grant, Derrick Harmon, Walter Nolen, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, what if all six of those guys are gone, and as is Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron, and every cornerback that you think is a first-round talent, and then you're sitting there at 21 and you're like, crap, those were the three big positions we were looking at. We don't feel that any of these other guys are like, worth a 21. What if the best option that you truly think on your board is Shador Sanders? And you want to be ready because you want to have talked to him, get a sense of who he is so that you're not swinging blind at that situation, because who knows, he might come in on Thursday and he might knock it out the park. His father Deion Sanders was a heck of a personality, but he's a whole different person. I wonder what if he comes in, you at least know what you're getting in that situation, so you're not making a blind decision to look at that. And I think that's where if I'm the Steelers, I get that pace of things. But Ray, just as a person who I evaluate college talent, we talk about it in our draft coverage and stuff that we do. I don't see it with Shador Sanders that I think that he is this game changer quarterback that you take in the first round when you're talking about maybe doing that next year with next year's quarterback class and trading up to go get him. When you're planning to draft a quarterback in next year's first round and trading up to do so, it would make more sense to use that pick to help you accrue other talent in other places, especially because here's the thing, even if at 21, even if there's a run at corner, there's a run at D-line, there's a run at receiver, and all 9 of those top prospects that we've talked about in those positions that would be worthy of the 21st overall pick are gone. If all that happens, that means someone crazy has fell, like Ashton Jeanty might be sitting there, or Tyler Warren, like someone ridiculous. And either you take that guy or you say, who's desperate for this guy? You trade back, and maybe you'll get some more draft picks, and maybe you'll recoup something that will make you feel better about losing that second round pick of the DK Metcalf trade.
Yeah, Chris. I mean, I think it's okay to draft quarterbacks in 2025 and 2026, but that can only happen if you take one, say, in the 3rd or 4th round this year, right?
Exactly.
You get a developmental guy. What's this guy all about? Could he be the future? And you got a year to look at him. And then if that doesn't work out, you're not sure about that guy, then you can go all in on 2026 with the draft capital that you have. Now, going back to Brian's exercise, the best case scenario mock draft, the Steelers don't do anything like that. They actually used to do mock drafts every year. They don't do that anymore, but they will have their top 21 prospects on a board on draft night. So it may not be a true top 21. Like, for example, they're not going to have offensive tackles selected, right? But they will have their top 21 board, and they're going to go into draft night knowing, unless there's a trade up or a trade back, they're going to go into draft night knowing, hey, we got 21 players that we're going to feel comfortable with. We feel good. If nothing else happens, we know that one of those guys will be there. So that's how they've operated here, in recent years. And, mock drafts used to be a thing even within front offices, not so much anymore, but they definitely still do go through those exercises. They're going to have a big board, and they are going to know exactly what could happen to them on draft night before it happens.
Exactly. And that's my thing here is Ray, is they're trying to play out different scenarios. And that is what is happening here. And that's so much what the research is. And that's where things get really tricky when it comes to how the Steelers how all teams want to handle the draft process, because there's also sometimes that things are just smoke screens and we'll talk about that with some of these other decisions the Steelers are making in their pre-draft process, where like they're looking at certain guys, but and they're checking boxes there, but sometimes the team wants you to think, oh yeah, we're really looking hard at X player over here, X player over there, and meanwhile their true intent is has been the same player the entire part of the process. That's where I think if the Steelers are moving that way with Shedeur Sanders, I totally get it. If they're considering taking him at 21, that's the one I'd be like, I don't see that. I think that if you found a way to trade back in the first and then move up in the second, move up to get a second round pick again, and he's there in the second, then I would understand. Then I'd be like, okay, that's more of a value for where you can see it. But the first round pick this year needs to be a foundational piece that goes to addressing one of those key positions we talked about, the tackle, corner, receiver, somewhere on the team that's going to help it, so that when you do get your franchise quarterback, that's another player contributing to the whole piece of the pie, rather than doubling down on a quarterback position where you're going to have you draft one in the first round next year. That means you basically you made your first round pick this year a permanent bench guy if you hit on your pick next year.
Yeah, and of course, how does Aaron Rodgers play into this whole situation? I suppose if Aaron Rodgers isn't in the cards, then maybe a quarterback at 21 would be a little bit more of a possibility. But I don't know about you, Chris, but I kind of feel like they're going to draft a quarterback no matter what. Aaron Rodgers is going to be 42 next fall. It's a 1-year deal with him. We all know that. So they're 2025 draft process doesn't really change a whole heck of a lot, I think. I still think they're going to draft one. I think just now it's a matter of what round. Is it going to be 21? Is it going to be third round? Is it going to be fourth round? Exactly where does that fall? But, what they've done so far in the last 3 months, and especially now with these two visits with Dart and Sanders, I'm pretty convinced right now that they are at least going to take a quarterback in the draft. And I don't know what round, but I'm getting closer to believing that, yes, they are going to take a quarterback this year.
I'm right with you on that, because I do think that I've said before on this show, I think this isn't the year of the starting quarterback in the draft. This is the year of the backup quarterback. And I think there's plenty of good prospects that could fit that role that you could take in the third, fourth, fifth rounds and feel comfortable with them either being the backup to Aaron Rodgers this year or being the future backup to the guy that you make a serious move for next year. We got more to talk about. I want to talk about other players that have been coming in for visits on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. We'll be focusing on that here next on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. Stick with us. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know that Edgar Snyder Associates handles workers' compensation? When you've been hurt on the job, do you know who decides when you're better? And do you know who decides when your treatment is over? And do you know who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's actually the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? Does you feel like someone's not on your side? Make sure that you get someone on your side by calling Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR, because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve every single time. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, before we do jump into the pre-draft visits and looking at the offensive side of the ball there, I think we should at least acknowledge that there's the potential of the situation happening where tonight, the Pat McAfee show, where Aaron Rodgers is often a guest, is happening at PPG Paints Arena. 8 p.m. is the official start time, and there's been speculation that maybe Aaron Rodgers will use that to announce that he's coming to Pittsburgh and he's signing with the Steelers. Certainly would be on brand for his showmanship and for Pat McAfee's usage of stars to boost their show. But I just wanted to gauge from you, do you even consider this a possibility actually happening? Is this something that's on your radar? Or is this just another day of, hey, we're just all waiting around for whenever Aaron Rodgers decides to tell everyone what he wants to do?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron's kept everyone guessing so far. Is it a possibility? Yeah, it's a possibility, Chris. But I haven't heard from anyone that Aaron was flying in for this show. Even when he came in for his visit a couple of Fridays ago, I found out Thursday night that it was a possibility, and then we finally got it confirmed and reported it Friday morning. So I haven't heard anything to that extent as far as him flying in for this show. But as you know, Chris, I mean, Pat McAfee and Aaron Rodgers, they have the means to keep that quiet if they really wanted to. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a possibility, but I don't really have a good handle on whether it's going to happen or not.
No, yeah, I'm kind of with you that, like, I've heard about the possibility. It's at this point, though, as reporters, I kind of just like, if this was Aaron Rodgers 4 years ago, I think it'd be a different story. But it's like we kind of know that this guy is just a simple 1-year stopgap quarterback who they do not expect to be a super game changer, just to be a guy that's going to help them get from point A to point B, and next year be the year that they actually go get their franchise quarterback. So felt we had to address that. If it happens tonight, you'll get all the coverage. We got a person there for us, so we'll have that covered. But Ray, something that we do have covered all the time is, and you've been doing a great job of this, keeping up with the pre-draft visits the Steelers have been bringing in. Let's focus on the offensive side of the ball since we've been talking about quarterbacks so far. So far, the Steelers have they have 17 visits completed or scheduled.
They have 17 visits completed, and they also have a couple more with the likes of Galvin Bartholomew and guys of that ilk who are not counted against their 30. So the real number is 20. But in terms of how many they're allowed to bring in, it's at 17. So they have 13 more visits to do. And I think they have to wrap those up at some point next week, Chris.
So we're going to see more and more of the Steelers' top 30 visits officially come in here. But looking at the offensive side of the ball, they've taken in some quarterbacks, they've been taking in wide receivers, they've been taking in running backs. It seems like they really aren't looking at all offensive line, which tracks with they've drafted a lot of offensive linemen, so that makes sense. But I do wonder though, Ray, if there's something to glean from what quarterbacks that they've looked at. Shador Sanders is part of it, but so is Tyler Shuck. He's been part of that process. And again, we'll get to the defensive side of the ball because I think there's some bigger questions there too. But looking at the players that they've looked at on offense, who stood out to the most to you about that signals what the Steelers could actually be planning to do with their earlier picks?
Yeah, so I mean, you have the two quarterbacks, Dart and Sanders, who definitely would be candidates at 21. Really, the only other pre-draft visitor who would fall in that first-round mix would be Texas receiver Matthew Golden. Every other player that they've had in Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, pretty much all the running backs, those are all second and third-round targets. So we mentioned there's going to be 13 more, so I'm sure there's going to be more first-round targets that do come in. But at this point, at least offensively, if you want to break it down that way, just Dart, Sanders, and Matthew Golden, they're pretty much the only guys who would be possibilities there at number 21.
That's the interesting thing there is that you look at the first round options that they've listed out so far. If I was to look at those types of guys, Matthew Golden would make a lot of sense. I think he's a really good separator. I think he's a heck of a playmaker wide receiver. But with their signing DK Metcalf and George Pickens hasn't been traded away. Would he be that fit there that you'd want to get at the first round pick? When was the last time? Was Santonio Holmes the last first round pick wide receiver this team has made?
Yeah, that was 2006, and I believe you are correct. Yes.
So, I mean, that would buck a long time trend the Steelers have kind of maintained throughout the entirety of the Mike Tomlin era.
Yes, but Andy Weidel, when he was in charge of the Eagles drafts, he drafted two receivers. And I think Andy only ran the board for 4 years with the Eagles.
Okay.
It was Devontae Smith in 1 year, good player. Jalen Reagor the other, not so good. So, I know Andy wasn't making those choices, but Andy had those guys ranked. So he's kind of 1 for 2, on the with his average there with receivers in the first round when he was in Philly.
And those two picks also came back-to-back years. Jalen Reagor, funny enough, 21st overall for the Eagles, much like the Steelers picked this year. Devontae Smith, though, 10th overall when they went and got him. And like you said, Devontae Smith certainly working out, Super Bowl champion, part of what they're doing right now. Jalen Reagor, not as much. But again, it's interesting to look at the wide receivers that they have there and think okay, where could they be going with this? Are they looking at that? But again, I think that the Dart and the Sanders bringing them in is to kind of kick the tires, make sure that you're not missing out on a guy that you think could be a great locker room person, a great person that could fit into what you're doing. Because sometimes you never know. Sometimes, in those conversations, you learn something about somebody that you're like, hey, this guy does have what we think could be the juice. And other times it's just, hey, you know what? Okay, we don't want that guy around, so glad we scratched that itch. Or you're like, you know what? If that guy falls to us in the third round, we'd be very happy to have him because he fits our culture well and he'll fit what we're trying to do for the long term well.
Yeah, and absolutely. And how often do you hear, Chris, that 4 years later the Steelers pick up somebody who's been cut, and lo and behold, the Steelers brought him in for a pre-draft visit, during his draft year. So they know they can't draft 30 guys. I think last year 4 or 5 guys they drafted who came in for top 30 visits, but they do use that intelligence when guys get cut, when they want to make a trade. So there is value. It's not just for the 2025 draft. They actually use all this information years down the road when these guys later become available.
Right, exactly. I think that's part of this too, is making sure that you make contact with people that you are interested in. You're like, we're probably not going to be able to get this guy, but at least we know who he is. I want to look at some of the running back guys here, because the wide receiver, you had Matthew Golden. I also really like Jaden Higgins, but I think he's more of a second round pick. But you look at the running backs that they've brought in here: Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. Those two guys scream second to third round pick range. Basil Tootin out of Virginia Tech. I think more of a third, fourth round guy at best there. But I think that very much aligns with where the Steelers, I thought, would be looking and should be looking at running back in this draft class.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's more guys who are going to come in. It's been reported that Ollie Gordon is going to come in for a visit. So unless that was canceled for whatever reason, that's going to happen. So, they'll be up. I bet you out of the 30, Chris, I bet you they'll have 5 or 6 running backs, which is a considerable percentage. We all know they're going to draft one at this point. It is now just a matter of what round. And I don't know that they know right now, because I think the running back market in this draft, it's going to be really interesting. Does Ashton Genty go top 5? Does he go top 10?
Yeah.
Or do they fall a little bit? And if they fall a little bit, that's going to push everyone else down. Genty goes in the teens, then maybe Hampton goes late 20s, and then you got this flood of running backs who are going to go second and third round. So depending on what happens at the top there, I think there very well could be some very good running backs available in the third and fourth round too. And the Steelers are going to have to make a call on that. They definitely won't get left out of the running back market, but I definitely think they're going to sit back and see how the draft unfolds on day one before they make that determination.
I think that's the thing here, is being patient, waiting to see how this plays out. That could determine a lot of different factors as far as which way they go and what type of running back they want. Because, like you said, this is a deep class, a lot of options. I do wonder the Ashton Genty situation there. Where will he go? Because he's kind of the wild card in this first round, where running back is not the position that people want to draft early anymore because of how it fits in longevity and you want to pick a player that's going to be around 8 to 10 years. Running backs usually aren't prime for that long. But Ashton Genty's playmaker ability just screams like, hey, if you put that guy in your offense, you are going to fly. And it'd be really interesting to see how far does he fall and how does that impact other people's draft decisions. Something else to monitor here that we'll keep a close eye on. We got to switch to the defensive side of the ball, though, because there's been one position that Ray and I have been banging the table about for months. The Steelers should be and will be interested in on the first day of the NFL draft in a couple of weeks here. But they haven't explored it the way that you think they might with their top 30 visits. What does that mean? We'll talk about that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you the show is brought to you by UFC Gym. Pittsburgh, are you ready to train like a champion? UFC Gym has everything for total body health under one roof. They have group classes from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Zumba, personal training, cardio, weights, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and more, all for an unbeatable price. Not sure where to begin? All members get a starter session with an expert coach to help map out your fitness plan. Your first visit is on us. Drop in with free parking at Market Square or the waterfront and follow UFC Gym Pittsburgh on social media. Train different, feel unstoppable at UFC Gym. We're also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, Gallucci. Savinas, Kane, Gallucci are your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers. They have over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation at Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. All right, Ray, let's talk about the defensive players that they brought in this pre-draft visit process at this stage. And again, there's about another week and a half or so for this to go down. But looking at some of the players they've brought in, they have brought in defensive linemen, Ray, but not any of the defensive linemen so far that you and I have talked about our first round grades. They brought in J.J. McGuez out of Ole Miss. He's more of a mid to late round guy. They brought in Iowa's Yahya Black, mid to late round guy. They brought in Jamari Caldwell. Now he's the Oregon teammate of Derrick Harmon, and he's more of like a more traditional nose than Harmon is, but again, mid to late round guy. So it just looks like thing after thing after thing. And then most recently, they brought in Elijah Roberts out of SMU and Florida State's Joshua Farmer. None of those guys are Kenneth Grant, Derrick Harmon, or Walter Nolen, any of the or even Darius Alexander or Tyleik Williams, any of the guys that are slotted to be worthy of a first round pick or an early second round pick if they even traded out of the first round. What does that say to you about what they're actually doing here at D-tackle? Is it possible that this isn't on their radar as much as we've thought it's been?
Well, you do have to be careful because we are taping Wednesday morning and they have 13 more visits to go pretty much within the next week. They're going to wrap up next week. Shamar Stewart is supposed to come in this week. Now, Shamar Stewart is interesting. He was my first mock draft this year. He was my pick for the Steelers, but he's kind of like half a D lineman, half an edge, right? I mean, he was 280s during the season. And when he prepared for the combine, Chris, he got down to 267, and everyone at that point said he's an edge. And athletically, he is an edge. But there are going to be certain teams like the Steelers who are going to make him a hybrid, or they're going to want to make him a hybrid. So I think that's noteworthy. But you're right. Of all the first-round defensive line targets, to this point, the only one we know about is Shedeur Stewart. So there's time for those guys to come in. I think what this might tell you, if let's say hypothetically they don't go D-line at number 21, I think it's more than likely, Chris, and we've broached the subject before, nose tackle Keanu Benton bumps out to the 3 technique to replace Larry Ogunjobi, and then you do draft maybe more of a traditional big run stuffer in the middle rounds, a guy like a Jamari Caldwell. That could be maybe what's part of their plan there. So, we're speculating about, the what ifs here, but if they don't go D-line at number 21, I do think there's a pretty good possibility that Benton, who does have some versatility, I know he came in as a nose, but he does have some versatility, and they might say, hey, Keanu, we're going to put somebody bigger at the nose. We're going to take those responsibilities off you. We want you to concentrate on being a full-time starter out of 3 technique. I do think that's a possibility.
So I want to point this out too, because this is important to talk. Now, there are several stages of the draft where the Steelers can talk to guys. It's not just the top 30 visits. There's the combine, which is a big. There's their pro days where they visit them there, and there's other stages. If you're a part of the East-West Shrine Bowl, things like that. And I do think it's important to note that while none of those top defensive linemen that we're talking about, D tackles that we're talking about, have been top 30 visits yet, all of them have been in contact with the Steelers at some point. Yes. Walter Nolen was at the Senior Bowl. Both Kenneth Grant and Derrick Harmon were guys they interviewed at the combine. So they've had contact with these guys. And I don't think it's a neglection there. It could just be the Steelers are checking boxes and taking care of things, looking at players to explore other options while these are players that they know that they're going to be looking at here. So again, I think part of this is just the process that you go through in the draft and during the draft, where certain guys you take harder looks at, certain guys you kind of have a feel for because they've been your priority for months now in this draft process. And I think that could certainly be part of why these guys haven't been in yet. So if there's a Steelers fan panicking out there, do they not care about their D-line? I don't think it's that. I think it's that they've probably checked some boxes that they know what they need to do, and there's other research they have to do to complete the rest of how they see the rest of their big board playing out over the rest of the draft.
Yeah, look at last year. Omar and Mike did not go to Washington for Troy Fautanu's pro day, but Troy Fautanu was flown in for a visit, a top 30 visit, and then he ended up being the pick. So you're right. It doesn't have to be a top 30 visit and a pro day visit, but usually it's one or the other. And lately they have been, at least with their high picks, their first, second, third round picks, a lot of those guys in recent years have come in for visits.
Let's look at some of these other guys they brought in on the defensive side of the ball, and it's been the secondary. It's been looking at corner. Most recently, as you wrote, they brought in Trey Amos yesterday. For a visit, the Ole Miss cornerback, a really good press man, sticky type of cornerback. They've also brought in Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. Very similarly, press man, bigger cornerback, likes to get physical. Can make plays. And then they also brought in highly athletic Nick Emanwari, safety out of South Carolina here. 3 interesting athletes to bring in for your secondary. I think Nick Emanwari is a first-round pick. I don't think he falls in any way to the second round. Amos and Thomas, I think Thomas should be a first-round pick. I don't think he will be, though, because he didn't run a great 40-yard dash. He ran like the 4.5s, the high 4.5s. Trey Amos, I think, just has the tools to be. I think these guys are more second-round cornerbacks. Does that mean that we should be looking at the Steelers trying to make a play to get to get a cornerback of that caliber at that stage of the draft?
I don't know about cornerback, but let me throw something else at you here.
Okay.
And, we hear Mike Tomlin talk about this a lot throughout the season when we're, in the midst of a season and things are happening and you got to find different players to fill different positions. What is he always talking about? Positionless players, right?
Yep.
And I think Nick Emanwari is one of those guys for sub packages. I mean, he's kind of been compared, and I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but Cam Chancellor, right? That big, tall, rangy safety. I think Eamon Warrior is probably a better athlete than Cam Chancellor, but Cam Chancellor did a lot for the Seahawks back when they were the Legion of Boom, right? He could come up, he could fill in the run game. He was also a very, he was a good, he was a guy who could create turnovers as well. He's a very important part of that secondary. Big guy too. So I think Eamon Warrior, you could have Minkah Fitzpatrick and Deshaun Elliott as your starters this year, but I could see a very real scenario where Eamon Warrior is kind of like that chess piece. And then if you want to take it a step further, we touched on Shamar Stewart a little bit, but maybe he's another positionless player. Some teams have him as an edge, but I said at the very beginning of this process in January, Chris, he played 5 technique, he played 3 technique, he played up and down that line at Texas A&M. And there are those types of hybrid defensive linemen now who are becoming really more of the norm, right? I mean, it's not just, we have these labels for guys, noses, 3s and 5s, but a lot of times these guys are so versatile that they can play pretty much anywhere up and down the line. And in Stewart's case, on the edge as well. So people freak out a little bit because you get, the DeMarvin Leal comparison and, Leal
that's where I was going next.
Right? I mean, that's a very real thing, but don't get confused. Like Shamar Stewart is 10 times the athlete that DeMarvin Leal is. I mean, this guy is a legit first-round talent. There are reasons that DeMarvin Leal slipped to the 3rd round, and it's not all because of his athleticism. So that's a big part of the evaluation. But I do think it's important. We got into this discussion because of the secondary, but I think a lot of these guys, at least with Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin, they're going to play different positions within that defense. And I think Stewart and Eamon Warrior would be 2 guys who would, move around and play multiple spots for you.
This could be very interesting to see where the Steelers try to go here, if they want to get fancier with some of their picks in the first round, seeing how they could fit guys into their defense, or if they want to get one of those picks of that are of major concern to them that we've been talking about. But hey, again, this is the draft process. This is why we lock you in here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We keep you up to date with their visits. We keep you up to date with what's going on and with the possibilities here, just as we do here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, thank you for joining me, and thank you all for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast. This has been our Wednesday episode. We'll keep you up to date. Stay tuned. If something happens at the Pat McAfee show with Aaron Rodgers, we'll let you know here, and we'll have something up very, very quickly here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, thanks for tuning in. Remember to find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back on Friday with Brian Batko, finishing out the week, getting you ready as the Steelers move forward. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.